What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. And this one we're going to talk about wildcarding in Game Week 29. So this is for anyone that doesn't really want to wait till after Game Week 30. They think their team needs a wildcard right now. They want Spurs, Liverpool, Arsenal players and stuff like that. So we're going to talk about why it might be tricky, some things to think about, and why you might want to save it until later, and how chips kind of play a part in that. So if you do enjoy it, give it a like and hit that subscribe button if you're new around here. So let's start off with why it's tricky, and then we'll get into the drafts later on. So one of the things is which players to target that have lots of fixtures. And obviously this is fixtures to be rearranged. We know there was a lot of postponements so far this season, and a lot of those fixtures have not yet been rearranged. Now, one thing, I'll show you the fixtures in a sec, but one thing to remember is obviously we do have transfers. I think one of the things I found with my wildcard in 26, I wouldn't say it was a trap, but because obviously the timing, like the amount of time we had to build the wildcard was quite short, I didn't necessarily build in too many transfers, and we can get other players in, right? So if there's a player later on that you need, you can bring them in. But ideally, you try and manage at least part of that future, those future moves now when you wildcard. So if we look at the fixtures to rearrange, specific teams, obviously Arsenal we're looking at anyway, Spurs we're looking at anyway, and Chelsea, a lot of people are going to have Reece James. So they don't really matter as much. And I would say Norwich don't matter hugely. Maybe Villa slightly with just one game. But the three big ones are Leicester, Everton and Burnley. So Leicester have got 3 games to rearrange. 2 of them are fairly decent, Norwich and Everton. Everton have got 4 games to rearrange after Game Week 30. There's going to be a lot of double game weeks for them. And they're all fairly decent fixtures. There's not like a really bad one like a Chelsea or a Man City or a Liverpool, something like that. And then Burnley have got 3 as well. Everton, Southampton and Villa. Now what people will usually do is just kind of laugh it off. I don't want any Leicester, Everton, Burnley players. But think about how you've reacted to double game weeks recently, right? There's been a double game week. You've wanted players. Don't kid yourself that you're not going to want these players later on. So one of the challenges with a wildcard right now is how many of these players do you get? Because they're not all necessarily great right now. And how many do you put off buying until later? And obviously one of the advantages to wildcarding after Game Week 30 is we may have more information about exactly when the fixtures will go, and then you can start planning around that. So Everton, for example, yeah, we've just seen them lose 5-0 to Spurs. We're all into buying Spurs players. We all hate Everton players. But if they suddenly had those 4 games over the space of 4 to 5 game weeks added on to the ones they've already got, and Calvert-Lewin's playing regularly and looking fit or whatever it might be, then there's players in there that you might want. Like, don't tell yourself you're definitely not going to have them because you might change your opinion. The problem with the wildcard now is how many Everton players do you really want to put in now? Not that many. Whereas if you wildcarded in Game Week 31 or 32, that might change. It might look a little bit better to have a few in your squad. So it's hard to kind of get that balance right now. And obviously the value of wildcarding kind of 31 to 34 could be quite big, especially if you've got your bench boost. The one issue I see, and again, I've looked for a few different drafts, maybe you can come up with something better, but it's very difficult to bench boost. You're not going to bench boost in Game Week 30, absolutely not, because if you're wildcarding with a lack of kind of Liverpool players, or maybe like a lack of Chelsea players, then your wildcard probably isn't that good. And being able to bench boost in Game Week 30 when there's only like 4 fixtures on just doesn't sound like a good plan whatsoever, right? So you're not going to be able to bench boost in 30. So then you're looking at bench boost in 31 or 32. And in 32, Man City play Liverpool. So it's not even that great of a fixture for those players in your squad. It just doesn't look great. So if you haven't got the bench boost, it's a little bit easier, I would say, to wildcard right now. If you do, you're possibly then putting it off until you either have a good bench at some point, it doesn't have to be Game Week 36, or you're hoping you get through to Game Week 36 with a good team in hand. So I think it's a little bit tricky to wildcard this week because of that. It doesn't mean that you definitely shouldn't do it, but you need to think about it, right? And again, these fixtures are something we need to think about as well. So the pros are, obviously, you cover double game week 29 and blank game week 30, and you can still set yourself up with a pretty good team for the future, and you will have transfers, right? If there's a double game week, doesn't mean, like, you know, if Everton have a double game week, it doesn't suddenly mean you need 3 Everton players necessarily, okay? If there's only 2 teams doubling and you want to captain one from those teams, you only need to bring that player in. So I don't want to, like, put people off because they don't have triple Leicester, triple Everton, etc. No one's going to be doing that with their normal teams, and I would suggest that no one's probably going to do that if they wildcard after game week 30 either. But you still need to think about it. You obviously avoid any big hits. Spurs, like I said, beat Everton 5-0 last night. A lot of people are now looking at Doherty, Kulusevski, Son, Kane, like 3 of them, plus other moves as well for maybe getting a triple Arsenal or getting an extra Liverpool player in. You can avoid taking those big hits by wildcarding right now. And obviously, like I said, jump on Spurs and kind of triple Liverpool. The cons is the bench boost seems to be one of the biggest issues. I think it's, people that wildcarded in 28 probably in most cases set up a Game Week 29 bench boost. Those of us that wildcarded in 26 set up a Game Week 28 bench boost. And I am definitely not one of those people that thinks you only have to bench boost in a double. I do think that's the most optimal way to play it if you can. But if you can get a good single Game Week bench boost, you should definitely play it. I just think it's very difficult with the 29 wildcard. And obviously the final stretch from Game Week 31 to 38, there could be a lot of points there. There's a lot of games to rearrange, more doubles, more blanks and stuff like that. And like, if you think about how a Game Week 28 wildcard looked versus a 26, it had already changed after a couple of weeks. In another couple of weeks, by Game Week 31, it could have massively changed again. So I would suggest if your team's not looking bad right now, you probably don't need that wild card. But if you're set on doing it, let's talk about some drafts. All right, so this is a draft I've come up with, and I'm going to talk through a few different changes and why there's certain players in there. Obviously, you might have different squad value to me, so you might have more money to spend, you might have less money to spend, right? So don't worry too much about that. You can change the team how you want. This isn't necessarily what the final draft would look like come Saturday anyway. So straight away, it's a pretty cheap bench, right? You've got Cody there. He's in there to kind of cover you in Game Week 30. And he's fairly cheap. Same with Ramsey and Amati. So instead of, this is where it kind of gets tricky with thinking about the future, for example, and kind of booking in transfers, is you could go for Gordon in that spot, and he might actually be a better option from Everton, because although he doesn't play in Game Week 30 like Ramsey does, he does have 2 games this week, right? Because Everton have got a double. So that would actually work out fairly similar. My only slight worry is I feel like Ramsey looks pretty nailed now, and to be honest, Gordon probably does as well because he's played a lot of minutes. But when everyone's back fit, like Gray and players like that, and obviously we saw Calvert-Lewin start last night with Richarlison as well, and then you had Gordon on the other flank. How often does that continue when everyone's fit? We don't quite know, but that's one change you can make, right? Ramsey to Gordon. But the bench is fairly cheap. And the same with Amati, right? He's playing right now in that Leicester defence. Again, we might not think the Leicester defence is great. That's absolutely fine. You don't have to include them on your wild card. But he's very cheap, and we know they've got a lot of fixtures to rearrange. The problem is, how long will he keep his place? Once Fofana's back, who may be back in a couple of weeks, it might take a little while to get back up to scratch and playing week in, week out. But if he's back before the doubles happen, then Amati might be out of the squad, and we just don't know that. So this is why some positions, and they're only kind of bit part positions on the bench, are kind of tricky to go with. And obviously, if I just scroll through the next couple of game weeks, obviously Game Week 30 is a blank. You ain't going to be bench boosting. And then obviously you can switch players around. Like the first 11 in Game Week 31, if I can just make this a bit smaller maybe, looks pretty good. Hopefully you can still see that. But the bench is like Ramsey against Wolves, Schmeichel against Man United, Amati obviously double up against Man United. It's not great. And you can change the bench to specifically have a good bench this week, I'm sure. But you also want some players in there for those later doubles as well. And that's kind of why I've gone for the Lloris and Schmeichel double up. There's a lot of money spent on goalkeepers. You could work it a different way. You could have Ramsdale in there and have a Spurs defender maybe instead, depending on how you want to go for it. But when Schmeichel does have those extra fixtures to rearrange, those 3 extra fixtures, and obviously you could go for Pickford instead if you wanted to, you've got your double game week keeper there. But with Lloris, you also cover game week 29, which is why he's in there. I think just starting from the kind of base draft, there's a few questions you need to ask yourself. Is you're probably going to have triple Spurs, and you're probably going to have triple Arsenal. I mean, I keep talking about how Spurs is a little bit of a roller coaster. Like everyone's like hating them, then they're doubling up, and then they're getting rid of them again. Now we're all tripling up. But I do think because they've got the double, because I don't think they've got any other competitions to play now either. They've got the double, they've got the game in 30, and they've got good fixtures to end the season. You can definitely say that a triple up is viable. So your key decisions are, which is the triple up? How do you get those 3 players in? Do you go for Kane? Do you go with Son, etc.? For what it's worth, I think Kane is a perfectly reasonable pick over Son. Right? I would probably argue with like a lot of other people that Kane is a better option than Son right now. But I don't necessarily think that means you need to switch Son to Kane, right? But obviously, if you're on a wild card, you get the choice. And Kulusevski looks fairly nailed on. Lucas Moura is obviously only just back, but Kulusevski just offers a lot more, and he started really well for Conte. He's playing week in, week out now. I think he's a good enough player to pick. So then it's just, do you put Lloris in, or do you try and get to Son, or do you just get a defender like Doherty or Reguilon? Obviously, if Sessegnon's out for a while, then Reguilon looks pretty nailed on. So there's 3 Spurs players. Same with Arsenal. You probably want 3 Arsenal players because they play in Game Week 30. They are just playing well right now as well. They're doing pretty decently. And they've got another fixture to rearrange as well. And the double this week, I think it's okay. I think the Liverpool game could be fairly open if you go kind of all-out attack. And obviously Leicester at home is pretty good as well. With Liverpool, again, the triple up would be nice, but they don't play in Game Week 30. So you've got to be kind of prepared to kind of work around that. So in Game Week 30 with this team, you've got Lloris. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 with midfielders and goalkeepers. You've got the 2 strikers as well. And then you've got all of your bench plays. And Leicester obviously play against Brentford. So you're hoping that Tony and Mbombo don't score. And Cody and Ramsey also play as well. So you've actually got 10 players, I think it is. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then your whole bench is 10 players for Game Week 30. Is it the most ideal players? Not necessarily. But I don't think you're going to do too much better on a wildcard. You could go for someone like Vardy, for example, if you wanted to. But I think spending that much money on someone that's got Arsenal away, then Brentford at home, then Man United away, probably isn't great. So I don't think Vardy would personally be in my wildcard team. So that's probably... I think with Spurs, I'd be fairly set on Kane, Kulusevski, then a defender or a goalkeeper. I think Arsenal are a little bit trickier. So you could, for example, downgrade Van Dijk. So let's just say you put Van Dijk to Doherty. Obviously, he's quite popular right now. You can have Lloris as well because you've got 3 Spurs players. So you could put... Even if you didn't go for Ramsdale, you could go for a different goalkeeper that's got a double this week, like Sanchez, for example. It's not the greatest double, I get that, but him and Schmeichel rotate fairly well. And then by doing that, you've got a third Arsenal spot that you didn't have before, and you've got 3 million in the bank as well to spend. So you could do someone like Ramsey up to Martinelli and actually have triple Arsenal attack. Now, I don't think picking Ramsdale or picking Tierney or Gabriel is a bad choice, but I do think Martinelli is a very, very nice price, right? He is currently 5.3 million, and he looks fairly nailed. Now, Smith Rowe hasn't been available recently, but I still think, and I know I've argued with Arsenal fans on streams before, I'm pretty sure Smith Rowe is not part of the best first 11 right now. Odegaard, Saka, Lacazette, and Martinelli have played so much. Arsenal are playing so well. There's no other competitions to rest them for either. They've got a genuine chance of getting top 4. I think that continues for a little while longer. The only problem this gives you this week is a little bit of a benching headache because you have to bring Martinelli in for Broja against Watford or Rafinha against Norwich. I'd probably play Rafinha personally. But that would give you 1-2 doublers up front. Then you've got 4 in midfield, so that's 6. 7, 8 defenders and 9 with the goalkeeper. And then the next week, obviously, Sanchez doesn't play, but you've got Schmeichel, Cody, Amati, Kane, Lacazette. So again, that's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 players again for game week 30. And then for game week 31 onwards, most teams that are good for game week 29 are also good for game week 31. And obviously then you can start making transfers. This is game week 32, 33. Basically, the point is, and one of the reasons why game week 29 wildcard is good, is that teams like Liverpool, Spurs and Arsenal, you're going to want a lot of them this week, and they are good for the immediate future as well. I think Chelsea are probably the trickiest ones because they've got Newcastle at home, but they don't play in Game Week 30. So how many do you put into your team? If you wanted to get Rudiger in here as well, I've got 2.5 million in the bank. I could do that. So you could just take out Amati for Rudiger, for example. The problem with that is, with this team, you'd probably bench him this week. He then doesn't play for you in 30, and when you get to 31, okay, you could play him, but then you got to bench one of these attackers, and you probably wouldn't want to do that. So it's not that Rudiger is a bad option. It's just that I think with the team that I would build for Game Week 29, I just don't know how much game time he would get. So I'd probably leave that transfer for later on. But overall, this is kind of a draft-ish that I would like. Again, you could drop an Arsenal attacker to go for an Arsenal defender, or you could go for Ramsdale, especially if you've got money saved up in Ramsdale, like if you've had him for a long time. That's not an issue. But I think the key questions are, do you go for double or triple Liverpool? Because if you put someone like Van Dijk in, or even Robertson, because I mean, people aren't even talking about Robertson right now, is how do you fit him in alongside James and alongside Trent? Where do you make your sacrifices elsewhere? So again, I could go back to Rudiger to Amati, and that lets me do Doherty to Robertson, I think, just about. Yeah, with the exact money. Now, again, you might have more or less money, but you could go for Robertson instead and just not have you don't have to have triple Spurs, right? But that means you got one less player for game week 30. But then when you get to 31, you got Robertson against Watford at home, and double Liverpool defence is probably better than one Liverpool defender and one Spurs defender as well. So it all comes back to exactly what you want and how much money you've got to spend. If I had a bit more, like if I could afford Robertson and to go for Lloris in goal and to have Pickford or Schmeichel as a backup goalkeeper, then I'd probably look at that just to kind of cover a few different defences. But overall, like, that looks good. If you're someone that right now is thinking of like a 12 to 16 point hit, and then your team still isn't looking great, then I think that first 11 is good. I just think the bench boost is then very tricky. Now, the bench boost is an interesting one because it shouldn't necessarily stop you from wildcarding. It also shouldn't be written off. Some people are like, I just hate the bench boost, whatever, I'll just use it whenever I want. You should still try and plan for it. But I think overall, if you can save a lot of hits and have a good team for 29, 30, 31 onwards, then I don't think necessarily the wild card is bad. But for a lot of people, if you're already close to a team like this, I think you just take game week 29 on the chin and you probably wild card after game week 30, because there's going to be a lot of value in saving it and making sure you've got that bench boost for game week 36. So let me know what you think. Is there any players I've missed from this that you would definitely put in? Are you thinking of wild carding this week? Are you looking to save until after game week 30? Let me know what you're doing in the comments below. Give it a like if you enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button if you're new around here. And I'll have more videos for you tomorrow.